Hello, welcome back to Story Mantra. I'm Lindsay Preston here with my co-host Anju Gattani, the Amazon best-selling author, and we are here with Kathy Lyons, aka Jade Lee. She's back for a second part to our series, and we're so glad to have her here again because we could just talk for hours. So let's kick it off with Anju doing a further introduction, and we'll get started.
So here we are with two in one, Jade Lee and Kathy Lyons, two very different brands, very different genres, but behind them both is one fabulous writer. Kathy Lyons is the wild, adventurous half of USA Today bestselling author Jade Lee. So she is a USA Today bestselling author. And if you look below the video, you'll see the links to all of Jade Lee and Kathy Lyons' information, website, book purchases, sales, everything. A lover of all things fantastical, Kathy spent much of her childhood in Narnia, Middle-earth, Amber, and Earthsea. Meanwhile, Jade Lee fell in love with historical romance. Can we see a historical romance from you, from Jade Lee, please?
Into the lion's den.
That's quite a twist because you're Kathy Lyons and you've got Into the Lion's Den by Jade Lee.
I know. This is a shared world that Dragon's Blade developed, and I launched the shared world, and they had already named it the Lion's Den.
So if it isn't confusing enough that we have two authors in one, we now have two brands in one. And Kathy Lee and Jade Lyon adored all those ball gowns and rakish lords. But Kathy and Jade have a gift for creating a lively world, witty dialogue, and hot, sexy humor. Winner of several industry awards, and she's a USA Today bestselling author.
I think you mentioned that.
Yes, I did. Kathy/Jade has published 60 romance novels. That's 60 for those of you who are not sure what I'm saying. And she says she's just getting started. Kathy, over to you. How do you say you're just getting started when you've written 60? 60.
Well, you find different things to explore. And, it's like I would find a new writing technique and I would explore it for about 3 to 4 books. And then I would learn some new cool technique and explore that for several books. And this is my full-time job. I'm not teaching school or working in an office. This is what I do. And I write every day for several hours and several more hours. And
what's your routine like before Lindsay comes in with her question? I know I have to ask, since you talked about writing for hours, what's your routine discipline like?
I get up, I get coffee, and I do stuff just for about an hour in the morning in the pry your eyes open category and get moving. And then I sit down and I start writing, and I stomp around the house and I curse and I kick things, and I come back and I keep writing, and then I stomp around and go to the kitchen and eat a bunch of chocolate and gain a bunch of weight. And then I come back and I go back to writing. Eventually I go work out. Eventually there's dinner and my husband and TV in the evenings, but I do this 7 days a week. I work on weekends and I write a minimum of 2,000 words a day when I'm in the writing phase. There's the thinking phase where I just stomp around the house and make notes and then stomp around the house. And it's a very good thing that my husband works outside of the home, because otherwise he would be scared.
So during all this stomping around, a big part of what's so intriguing about all of your books is your central character. Your characters have these like great big wounds that need to be fixed, or at least addressed. So how do you handle that?
Well, I learned this technique, strangely enough, from a spiritual teacher, Matt Kahn, and he talked about everyone has a one of 4 different types of core wounds. Now, we will all have all of these wounds in one form or another, but the first one you get is usually cuts the deepest. That innocent little baby, toddler, whatever, that first wound, one of those will cut really, really deep. And so I pick one and I roll with that. And then because I write romance, I've also done gay romance too. So it's hero or heroine number 1 it needs to make the hero or heroine number 2 better. and the reverse. And so that all comes down to the core wounds. Now, if you like, I can kind of explain what they are.
I was going to ask you, what does that mean?
All right. So I'm going to try and make this make sense. There are 4 types of core wounds, and don't get hung up. They all kind of fold in on each other. And like I said, you can be a victim of all of them and probably are in one form or another. So the first one is abuse. And it doesn't have to be you were beaten to a pulp every day. There's lots of forms of abuse, but the core of that is that the child feels attacked. And so in adulthood, or in their romantic relationships, or in their careers or whatever, they are looking for safety, because their earliest wound is that they felt attacked. So they are looking to feel safe. Well, we all know people who have looked for safety in the wrong places. So that's part of growing up in adulthood, of looking and finding things that look like they are safe but are not, or things that find the things that are safe. So the love interest or the career or the other thing in the adult life will provide a core sense of safety. And that can be, if he gets out a gun and walks around with it and he learns how to be this cool martial artist. Or it could be that, that a home, and you, the author, decide what safety looks like. But that's how you build the abuse core wound. So what if the abuse core, or the core wound, is neglect? And neglect can be, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're locked in a closet and ignored for 3 years. Neglect can be mom and dad are working 7 jobs and they're not home and you're left on your own. There's lots of different forms that neglect take, but the core wound is that need for attention. So as the child grows, they look for ways to be seen. Now that can be, sparkle, sparkle, I'm an extrovert on the stage, or it could be I'm a serial killer and you're going to see me now, or someone, it's just different ways to be seen. You as the author create what that means. How are they looking to be seen? And then the love interest or the career will fill that need. So, whenever we see this in romance a lot, when the hero says, I see you, I see what you want, I see what you need. That is ticking a big box for the character who needs to be seen. The third wound is codependence. This is, and like I said, everyone has this to a certain extent. Codependence is, you can't be happy until I'm happy. Now, every parent does this. You can't get dessert until you finish your vegetables. You can't go play your video game until you finish your homework. But that's a normal type of parenting technique. The core wound of codependence is a form of slavery. It's mom wants you to do this, and mom is going to make you miserable until mom is happy, and then you're allowed to be happy. It becomes, this is how you get obsessive people pleasers. It's because I can't be happy until mom is happy, or until dad is happy, or until, whoever is happy. That's codependence, and it becomes a form of slavery. So the adult is looking for freedom. So all these people who are afraid to commit, that comes from a feeling enslaved as a child. It's a need for the freedom. But there's all sorts of different forms of codependence and slavery. And so you as the author figure out whether that manifests as, trying to find comfort in enslaving yourself to someone who gives you more freedom than mom. Well, that doesn't quite work. For true love, you need to give the codependent child as an adult freedom to be him or herself, and yet then willing still to commit to you or the career or to the whatever. And that's an interesting story right there. Someone who needs to feel free, but also needs to commit to a career or a job or a life partner. And the last one, even if you had the absolute happiest childhood of anyone in the planet, everything was perfect, at some point you are going to experience loss. Maybe grandma passes on, maybe something happens, maybe dad loses his job, but that creates a void inside the child that needs to be filled. And you as author can decide, well, what did grandma represent? Was that hearth and home? What did dad's job represent? Was that financial stability? So the adult is looking for wholeness, something to fill that void. And you get to decide whether whether it's finance, is this the person that needs, 100 million in the bank in order to feel whole? Or is this the person who needs someone at home cooking and cleaning and making chocolate chip cookies in order to feel whole? So it's one way to go at characters, is to look at what that core wound is, which tells you what the core need is. And then you get a whole history of, if you're looking for safety, well, I thought that was safe, and it turns out that wasn't safe. And so you can start building I tried to look for safety here, that didn't work, so now I'm looking here, and now I'm looking here.
That takes us to a new dimension, doesn't it? Of what you need versus what you want.
Yes.
Doesn't that change the game? And that takes your story on a different tangent.
Well, and when we're growing up, we are not it's not like an 11-year-old out there is going, I have a codependent wound and I am looking for freedom. So you've got to have experience where, as the author, they're looking for freedom, but they went about it the wrong way. And so that's an experience that is in the character's history that you can draw on. And then here they tried it this other way and that didn't work. Here it worked for a little bit, but then it didn't. So you can start building up that backstory, and it gives you something for the characters to talk about. I thought dating this guy would be safe. It turns out it wasn't safe. Well, and then you can talk about, that's part of a previous lover's discussion. Or I thought this job would make me whole. Turns out it didn't. And that's, it's something for your people to talk about in a meaningful way. So it's not just, there was a sale over at Macy's. It's actual substantive discussion about what formed them in their life.
But we all have to be careful. Sorry, go ahead, Lindsay.
I would say, so because you have you have different times and places and cultures and all of that going into your actual surrounding of where these characters who have these core wounds are kind of located and during that time period. How does that play into it if you're, say, in some kind of fictitious world where nothing would happen, or vampires? How do you make those core wounds play into it? Or do you have to consider their environment when you consider their core wounds?
You always you consider everything, especially, it's like, well, your vampire was a person at some point. And so what was the childhood like? What was the wound that child got? And how did he or she try and fill or heal that wound? Doesn't matter if you're in Mars or a vampire or historical. In order for the reader to relate to it, you've got to look for human type wounds, human type problems. And part of the beauty of this is, even though I, for example, grew up with a core wound of codependence, I can sympathize with neglect and abuse and loss. Those are all part of the human experience too. Just because it's not my deepest wound doesn't mean that at some point I didn't experience the trauma of, mom forgot to pick me up from school one day. That was really scary. And, I did get picked up and everything was fine. And that wasn't my particular, that wasn't the wound that cut deepest, but I can feel that. And so if your character has that abandonment issue or the neglect core wound, I can still feel it.
Do your characters need to be aware of their core wounds, or are they typically?
Um, I've done it both ways. It depends on, I happen to think, because I write romance, I happen to think of being self-aware as very sexy. But I've also written characters that aren't that self-aware, and they kind of have an idea that, I dated her and that didn't work, but you fit. And you fit, and I will always throw in that word. You make me feel safe. You make me whatever you see me. If it's the attention, you need attention, or I feel free to be myself with you. I use those somewhere. I'll use those words, even if the character doesn't know why they desperately need to feel free, even inside the relationship or even inside the job or murder investigation or whatever.
Well, I have to ask you this. Does every core wound stem from childhood? First part. And the second part, what about wounds that characters or people develop after in their later years, say in their teenage years?
The first deep wound you get is your core wound. It just, because you're such an innocent baby, this is my opinion, obviously, but babies and toddlers are wide open. They love completely. And when they melt down completely. So something that is an adult that is not going to cut that deep is going to slice to the core of that child. And so, the more experience you have, the more you realize, okay, mom forgot me, but she'll be here in 10 minutes. It's not as terrifying if you're an adult and you have other resources. It's when you're feeling so open and vulnerable. So those core wounds, this is just the one that cuts deepest. And you're going to have something in childhood. You're not going to make it to adulthood without something happening that's going to hurt. And because kids are so wide open, at least initially, that cuts pretty deep.
What about after? What, as
Well,
we get older, experiences?
They compound. So if your core wound was neglect, and so you have abandonment issues, every time you get abandoned, that cuts a little deeper because it goes
Into
to
that same wound, or does it develop into a new wound, which is a layer on top?
Well, both.
Ah,
So it cuts back, but it also, that doesn't mean you don't at some point have a girlfriend or a boyfriend who tries to develop, a codependent relationship with you. So if you have that neglect wound and you're looking to be seen, and then you date someone who you think sees you but is actually trying to enslave you in some way, that's a new wound, and it's technically the codependence enslavement type wound. So you have that, but it's not going to resonate all the way back to your childhood the way an abandonment wound would.
Do some of these wounds bring forth your actual character development? Like, is someone who's been neglected tend to be very clingy? Is that something that goes forward into their personality and their character traits? Do you see someone who's codependent is very much like, okay, I need my space, or don't get in my way, neglected, I need you, I need you, I need you, abusive, very timid? Does that kind of play through on who your characters become?
Yes, 100%. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or anything, so I am not drawing a real person. I am drawing a fictional person. So I make these lines clean. It's like, okay, this person has a neglect wound and so needs attention, needs to be seen. So I will carry that through. And so the job that he or she was always happiest at was one where they felt respected and seen. Whereas the one, sitting in the back corner punching numbers and feeling, that will carry, so the one where they're not seen is going to be a negative job experience. Did someone at some point try and enslave them in codependence or, abuse them? Maybe. But as I draw the characters, that may not be relevant to the story I'm telling, whatever story it is.
well, here's a thought. When we're also creating characters, and this is what I've learned, is that their behavior stems from their fears. A lot of their behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So is that fear the result of the wound?
Yep. That's how I would translate it. So the fear for abuse would be of getting attacked because you don't feel safe. You grew up with abuse or someone attacked you badly. I mean, so go to Batman. He was attacked and his parents were killed.
Mm.
And so is that a safety abuse type wound or is that a loss type wound? That I can say that's an abuse type wound because he's looking for safety by making the entire world safe. So he becomes Batman and he gets really, really fit and he surrounds himself with all those bat toys. And then he goes and he defeats the bad guys and he makes the world safe. So I'd say that feels like an abuse wound. You could also draw it as a loss wound and that he's looking for a return to the safety. I mean, you can draw it however makes sense to you in your story.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Did what I just say make sense?
Everything made sense, and it was it's so interesting. And unfortunately, we have to wrap up again. And I wish we could continue because I've got so many more questions.
Well, can we have a writing tip from you, please? A writing tip for all our writers and readers out there.
You just keep doing it. You just write and write again and write more and then write again. And each time you write, you'll find it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you just keep doing it. And then over time you get better and better. And some words will work and some words won't.
All right. And one tip for branding, since you've got 2 brands under your belt.
I'm sorry. So, and a piece of advice for branding?
Branding, author branding?
There is a voice that I associate with each brand. So the historicals are more lush. The language is more flowy. The sentences more complex. The faster paced contemporaries, especially the paranormals, are zippier and faster, shorter sentences and bolder colors. That is reflected in everything I do. So when I am Jade Lee, my clothing is more flowing, my hair is down, I tend to wear green. When I'm Kathy Lyons, I am more red and I'm zippier and hipper and my clothing is more contemporary. And I mean, you can see that reflected in the books, Kathy Lyons and Jade Lee. Just in terms of your appearances and your website and all of that, make sure it all flows. Because nobody is going to say, oh, Kathy Lyons is red, except it gets in there subliminally.
Those were some great tips. Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge of both Kathy Lyons and Jade Lee with us.
Thank you.
2 in 1.
Yeah. Thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Jade Lee. We loved having you and loved everything you had to teach us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, guys.